Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to begin proceedings. Can I just ask you please to turn off any mobile phones? Apologise for some of the technical delays. I'm going to invite Cantor Charles Chait to open proceedings with the song Ani Maamin, a song composed and sung on the transports to Auschwitz, a song of faith and hope.
Ani Maamin, Ani Maamin, Ani Maamin, Be'emunah Shalema, Beviaz HaMoshiach, Beviaz HaMoshiach Ani Maamin, Beviaz HaMoshiach, Beviaz HaMoshiach Ani Maamin, Ani Maamin, Ani Maamin, Ani Maamin, Be'emunah Shalema, Beviaz HaMoshiach, Beviaz HaMoshiach Ani Maamin, Ani Maamin, Ani Maamin, Ani Maamin, Be'emunah Shalema, Beviaz HaMoshiach, ואף על פי שישמח עם כל זה אני מאמין, עם כל זה מחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא.
My Lord Lieutenant, Mayor of Greater Manchester, Mr. Andy Burnham, Deputy Mayor Kate Green, Baroness Scott, Baroness Hughes, fellow clergy, Chief Constable, the Police and Crime Commissioner, Chair of the JLC, honoured guests, all. I am Rabbi Daniel Walker. It is my honour and privilege to welcome you here today on behalf of Greater Manchester to this Holocaust Memorial Day service, and to thank you for attending. In Judaism, memory is something we experience. Memory is something that acts upon us. Memory is something that brings change. And so today, as we remember the greatest atrocity in human history, we remember the Holocaust, we commit to change. We commit anew to ensuring that no such evil ever occurs again. So it's fitting that today on Holocaust Memorial Day, we also remember all our failures as human beings since then. Today we remember other genocides, and those who have been killed and impacted and survived them, including the atrocities in Cambodia and Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, the ongoing suffering and persecution in Myanmar. Today we remember, today we commit, today we dedicate ourselves to rising this world out of the darkness and mud and bringing it to light. It is a particularly great privilege to have with us, amongst a number of Holocaust survivors, our guest speaker, Mrs. Ruth Lax, a person who I can only describe as a beacon of courage, of hope, of grace, of dignity. A very special lady who will be sharing with us today her very powerful and moving experiences. Taken the fortitude, as a fortitude to share with us that experience so that we may learn from it. Now, though, I'd like to invite the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Mr. Andy Burnham.
Thank you, Rabbi Walker. Lord Lieutenant, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for coming today to this, the 5th Greater Manchester commemoration of Holocaust Memorial Day, and it has now become a fixture in our calendar. I just want to start by thanking some of our partners who've brought this day together and have helped us with the programme. Particularly, if I could thank Fran Horwich from the Association of Jewish Refugees. Thank you so much, Fran, for all of the support that you give us. Of course, Mark and colleagues at the Jewish Representative Council. We really do have all walks of life actually represented in the room today. People from across Greater Manchester society, across our 10 boroughs. And that itself says something, that people are here, that they've given time. We have colleagues from the trade union movement. Thank you, Lynn, for being with us. From our equality panels that we have at a Greater Manchester level. The Chief Constable is here today. Thank you, Stephen. Our Chief Fire Officer, thanks for being here, Dave. I was particularly pleased to know that we have Baroness Scott of Bybrook with us today. Government Minister, Minister for Faith. I was just saying that's an onerous job title, Minister for Faith, but it's wonderful actually that you are here today representing the government, and you're very welcome. And we do have our outgoing Deputy Mayor and incoming Deputy Mayor. So thanks to Baroness Beverly Hughes and to Kate Green for being here. I'm sure I've missed somebody, but be sure that your presence is noted, and you are very welcome. The theme for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is ordinary people. Ordinary people. So I thought I would just take that theme as my focus in this address today. In my role, I encounter lots of challenges, but I also get privileges. And I wanted to say to you all today, without even any question, without a shadow of a doubt, the greatest privilege I've been afforded in this role is to spend time in the company of people who witness firsthand man's greatest inhumanity to man. I consider that the greatest privilege I've ever had. Actually, more than that, I've got to know them personally. I was with Ike, Tommy, Werner and Ruth, Marianne, and Anne at the Imperial War Museum just on Tuesday as we opened or launched the exhibition, Portraits of Survivors. Incredibly moving, and I would recommend to you all to go and see it. But I've got to know you personally, and can I just say this? I don't put a suit and tie on for many people these days, but I do put a suit and tie on for you and King Charles, but I do for you, and that's about it. Because when you're in the company of greatness, you must recognize it, and I consider that is what we all are today. Because if we go back to that theme, ordinary people, I've read many of the testimonies that the Fed have brought together under the My Voice project. And I was reading Anne Super's book just this week. And if you read them all, they are stories of ordinary people, incredibly ordinary people who were living, if you like, ordinary lives. And what comes over is, obviously, hate can appear in anybody's life, can't it? And it does. The question is, what does an ordinary person do when confronted with hate? Because not everybody will react in the same way. Some people will turn away from a bully and give in or turn a blind eye. But some people won't, and some people will stand tall, stand strong. And that is when the ordinary person becomes the extraordinary. That is when Anne Super becomes Super Anne, or Super Ike, as I saw just before Christmas at Wellington School, where a young girl from Ukraine, a refugee here, had written to Ike, who's with us today, Ike Alterman, to say that she would like to meet him because she wanted to hear about his story, and they did meet. And anyone who's there will truly never forget what they saw. A room of 200 or more young people hanging on every single word. And if I could convey the passion, the conviction, the strength that you conveyed in front of those young people that day, when I reach the same age, if I do, then my goodness, then that would be something, because you that day spoke directly to them and they listened. And I would say that to everybody. This is the greatest privilege that we've got, to hear firsthand. So stop. Everybody should stop, pause, listen to what they have got to say and apply it afresh to the times that we are in now, because we need to do that. We must take the opportunity that we have right in front of us. And we can do that today. We can reflect and listen, and we then go out and we change what is happening around. Hate must be confronted in all of its forms. And I know that actually, if we turn finally to a positive, this place has done that actually through its history. Greater Manchester has been a safe haven for people, a welcoming place. It moves me as Mayor of Greater Manchester when I open Anne's book to read dedicated to Manchester, my beloved city. That means something, doesn't it? It should mean something to us all, that this place has stood for something. It's stood for something in difficult times. And it's incumbent on all of us, me absolutely, but everybody, to embody those values now in the modern Greater Manchester. And always to be a place that people would think of as a beloved city, where what matters is our common humanity. And what matters is a commitment to stand together and confront hate, discrimination of any kind when we see it. That is what Anne, Ike, and I'm sure Ruth, when we hear Ruth's words in a moment, will ask us to do. Listen hard to what they are saying and take that message out from here today. So we can celebrate this great city region of ours today, but we must live up to its high standards of the past. And that's our responsibility. And I see the younger generation with us today. Can I thank Phelange Park High School again for being part of this Holocaust Memorial Day event 2023, an exemplar school in Rochdale when it comes to Holocaust education. And we thank you for being with us today. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please spend an hour or so with us today of true reflection, true listening, and remember we are in the presence of greatness because the people with us today stood up to that greatest inhumanity, and we will, with great determination, draw inspiration from you all today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the Mayor alluded to, Holocaust Memorial Day has a theme. And I must say, at first, the idea of a theme struck me as slightly strange, but I think the idea is that the enormity of the Holocaust can sometimes hinder our ability to meditate on it and take lessons from it. And so the theme is ordinary people. And when I heard that theme, I must confess it jarred. Because surely, if you describe the Holocaust as anything, it is extraordinary. Even in the annals of human evil, the Holocaust was something extraordinary. And as the mayor said, those who survived the Holocaust are anything but ordinary. Pillars of strength and fortitude and inspiration. I wouldn't use the word ordinary to describe them. But of course, the idea is that before the Holocaust, the victims of the Holocaust were very much ordinary people. And the Havdil, as we say in Judaism, the perpetrators of the Holocaust were also largely ordinary people before they descended into the greatest pits of evil. And of course, those who supported, often at the risk of their lives, those who defended, those who protected, those who hid, Jewish people in Europe, they were just ordinary people doing acts of great heroism. And of course, those who welcomed survivors to this country also, just regular people, ordinary people doing the extraordinary. I have had the honor of meeting many survivors, many of whom I really count as my personal friends. And I can only say that the mayor's description of them is extremely apt. I remember what I think was the first time when I met a survivor, at least one that I was conscious of, should we say. I'd gone on a trip to Auschwitz, and our trip was accompanied by a man called Leon Greenman of blessed memory. And he told his story, and his story is seared on my heart, mainly because of how ordinary he was. He wasn't a man from an exotic place. He wasn't from Eastern Europe or somewhere. He was from East London. He was a regular British citizen who ended up in Rotterdam with his family at what was very much the wrong time and the wrong place. A man who, because of the absence of a British passport, found himself in Auschwitz. I remember him telling us how if he could have proved he was a British citizen, at that stage of the Holocaust, they would have released him, deported him maybe. But he didn't have that paper in his hand. He ended up in Auschwitz, and he survived, but his wife and his his son, didn't. And I remember thinking then, a much younger man than I am now, with young children of my own, I remember thinking that if this can happen to ordinary people, such a long time ago, then evil is something that we all need to be afraid of and that we all need to confront. The Holocaust happened quite a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago. And as I mentioned in my introduction, genocides are still occurring. Ordinary people suffered. Ordinary people were the perpetrators. There's a very fascinating book from a man called Christopher Browning who describes how a reserve battalion of what he describes as middle-aged German men turned into mass murderers. Victims of the Holocaust were ordinary people. The perpetrators were, in large part, ordinary people. We remember today are ordinary people. If ordinary people could bring suffering into this world, ordinary people can bring succor into this world as well. Ordinary people can bring light, can bring holiness, can bring goodness. I feel overwhelmed on Holocaust Memorial Day by the enormity of the day. I'm sure you do too. But the message of ordinary people is that small, achievable change, small, achievable goodness, something like this ever happening again. And God knows it's about time we made sure of that. To invite Ruth. Ruth, please come and share with us your experiences. And I want again to thank you again. I know this isn't easy in any stretch of the imagination. And I want to thank you again for your strength, your courage, and for enabling us to make the changes we need to do. Mrs. Ruth Lax.
Major Berman, Rabbi Walker, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to address you. My name is Ruth Lax, and I'm here this morning because my life has been saved by ordinary people who chose to be brave and heroic at a time when it would have been so much easier and so much safer to turn away. I was born in Hamburg, Germany, on March 7, 1936. My family lived on Heinzenstraße in a Jewish neighborhood, and my father and my uncle were partners in the textile business. Our life changed dramatically after Kristallnacht in November 1938. People thought it could never happen in Germany, but when they watched their synagogues being burned to the ground and the men being marched away to the concentration camps, it was a wake-up call. My father realized it would be no longer safe for us in Germany and made plans to get away. He had a visa for America, but decided that he would struggle to make a living there because he couldn't speak English. Afraid that he would be unable to support his family, we went to Holland instead, where he thought we would be safe. We were forbidden to take any contents from our home when we left, and my father was forced to sell his business for a nominal amount of money to non-Jews. We arrived in Holland with only some clothes and a small amount of money. We lived in southern Amsterdam, in an area where many Jews lived. I was only 3 years old, and Dutch became my mother language. But our safe existence was short-lived, though after Hitler conquered Holland in May 1940, bringing his hate-drenched anti-Jewish policies, which had already terrorized so many in my homeland in Germany. Jews were no longer allowed to own businesses, to go to cafes and parks, or visit any places of entertainment or recreation. Daily that was once taken for granted were snatched away, and our lives became a misery. In 1942, stores began to circulate of the Germans rounding up Jews and taking them to a collection center in an old theater in the middle of Amsterdam, the Schouwburg. From there, they were sent to a transit camp called Westerbork. Selections were made and people were then transported to death camps and slave labor camps, such as Auschwitz and Treblinka. Horrified by what he heard and fearful for his family, my father turned our little attic rooms into bedrooms. And at night we hid up there, in the hope the Germans would think our flat was empty. As the roundups progressed, it was no longer safe for us to stay in our apartment. My parents sought the help of a neighbor who was part of an organization called the Underground Workers. They were non-Jews who helped Jews to find safety. My brother Karl and I were placed with a couple whom we called Tante Annie and Oom Wim. I was 6 years old at the time. I remember how my parents prepared us for the terrible separation. They told us that it was safer for us to be apart for the moment and that they would come back for us. I held that belief with me always. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for my parents to be parted from us, such little children. My name was changed from Roos Gans to Rudy Klein in order for me to sound less Jewish. Tante Annie and Oom Wim were so kind to us. They treated us like their own, although they were in fact childless. They were wonderful people who looked after us with great warmth and care. Unfortunately, not all Dutch people were against the Germans. Some colluded with the occupation. In September 1943, the Germans came to our door. Someone must have been suspicious and denounced us. My brother and I were arrested along with Tante Annie, and we were taken for interrogation. We were brought to the police station, and I was asked over and over again where my parents were. I had been given a story, and I stuck to it. I was to say I was an orphan, and my parents had been killed in the bombing in Rotterdam. Although I was only 6, I was brave and never gave in. Nevertheless, Karen and I were sent to the collection point. Tante Annie was held in the police station, but after a day or so, she was released. To this day, I do not know how and why she was freed. The children at the collection point were housed in a creche before deportation. When I arrived, I found a girl named Mira Lezer who was working there. This was an extraordinary twist of fate, as she had been a nanny for our family. She took extra care of me. In fact, she saved my life. At night, the Nazis came to count the children so that they would take the correct number on the deportation the next day. Mira told me to get dressed quickly, and then she hid me outside in the sandpit so that I would not be counted in. She promised she would return for me if I stayed still and kept quiet. It was very dark as I crouched in the corner, and I was shivering with the cold. Mira was true to her word, and as soon as the Germans had left, she came back for me. There was a network of Dutch students whose aim it was to save Jewish children from transportation to the death camps. And that night, I was taken by one of these brave young men on a train to Limburg, the south of Holland. Karel had contracted polio and had to stay behind. It all happened so quickly, I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to him. I was placed with a kind Catholic family who had 2 children of their own. But just 1 week later, I too contracted polio and needed to go to hospital. This, of course, put me in grave danger, as I had no identity papers. Once again, I was lucky to be in the hands of a kind and courageous soul, the medical director of the hospital. He proved to be a brave and generous man, as he took me his huge risk of taking me in. I was most dreadfully ill, but I do remember the young student who had brought me on the train coming to see me. I was held in isolation, but I looked up and saw his head pop up in the window, holding a gift of 6 eggs, a rare luxury. It's a beautiful memory that will always stay with me. After 2.5 months, I was discharged from the hospital, but with nowhere to go. The family who had taken me in had a new baby and were nervous because of my having had polio. The students underground movement and took me back to Amsterdam. Sorry. I was placed in a home for handicapped children. The matron there hid a number of Jewish children in a separate room. We could not, of course, go out, and despite our young years, we helped with the general household chores, such as sewing and peeling potatoes. Although the matron was a kindly woman, she was sick herself and so often in bed. The nurses were much less caring, and I felt terribly lonely and sad. I remained there until the end of the war. I wonder sometimes how I coped. I was so young, so alone, and so very unhappy. When the war ended in 1945, I had no idea whether my parents had survived and were looking for me or had perished. I had had no contact with them since going into hiding with Tante Annie and Wim. One day I was called to the matron's room, given new clothes to put on, and told I had some visitors. As soon as they entered the room, I recognized my parents, and I was finally happy. My parents were overjoyed. They could not believe I had survived safe and sound, and that they finally had me back. All I wanted was to leave the home for good and be with them. I was just 9 years old at the end of this journey. My parents had survived in hiding in the north of the country and had found me with the help of the Red Cross. Tragically, my brother Karel had been taken from the crèche to Auschwitz and had perished there. He had been just 3 years old, and I mourn him to this day. Looking back, I never forget where would I have been without the bravery of those who helped me, those who were courageous in the face of terror. Tante Annie and Wim, with whom I stayed in contact long after the war. Mira Lezer, who was imprisoned in Bergen-Belsen but survived. The underground workers, the student who brought me on the train and gave me eggs, and who was later captured and executed. The family in Limburg, the medical director of the hospital, and the matron of the children's home. Thanks to them, I stand here now, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and great-grandmother. My family are the legacy of my extraordinary survival and of the ordinary people who chose to do good when they were surrounded by evil. Just as we must never forget the horrors of the Holocaust or the 6 million who were murdered by the Nazis, so we must remember that there were those people who gave life and hope. I thank them today and always for my survival. Thank you.
Ruth, there are no words. There are no words to express our response to that or our gratitude for you to do that. I think the most appropriate thing was that spontaneous show of respect. We have now hope. We have now the voice of a young generation. I'd like to invite Jennifer Wong and Ismail Malik from the Failinge Park High School. Failinge Park is a beacon school for Holocaust education. I'd like you to address us, please.
Hello, my name is Jennifer,
My name's Ismail.
and we are honored to be here today to share our work as Holocaust Youth Champions. This program is part of our wider work of our school. Failinge Park High School completes as part of their commitment towards Holocaust education. This commitment started when our teachers began working with the University College of London. The Beacon School program was founded by UCL and connects teachers and schools so that they can work together to improve Holocaust education. This gives teachers and pupils access to both experts and high-quality resources. Our guiding aim is to ensure that the Holocaust is never forgotten, to knock down any misconceptions, and to ensure that it can never happen again. As young people, we worry about the current climate. We see examples of anti-Semitic acts, the use of racist terms, and open prejudice. When we see this, we want to act. We want to be a part of a solution. Our work as Holocaust Youth Champions means that we can make a difference. And at Failinge Park, we are taught about human rights. In tutor time, we spend sessions on work created through our partnership with the Robert F. Kennedy Foundation. We think about the ripples of hope we can have as citizens, the changes that we can be responsible for if we speak up for what we believe in. As Holocaust Youth Champions, we want to make a difference to how people see prejudice, for people to see what can happen when hatred and persecution are allowed to grow. The theme for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is Ordinary People, as you all know. This is a theme that we revisit throughout our lessons. We start by looking at the ordinary people in Europe before the Holocaust, the wider range of different communities that existed in places like Poland, Norway, and Germany. Communities that existed in some cases for over 1,000 years. We look at the inventors, the ballerinas, the musicians, and the families of people who would be later persecuted and murdered. Because of this, we center the Jewish experience. We regularly revisit one family, one man. A man who wanted to share his story as a British Holocaust survivor. In his book, An Englishman in Auschwitz, he tells his family's stories. Leon Greenman was born in London's East End on 18th of December 1910. He was born to a Jewish family. He was a hairdresser, a boxer, and someone who loved to sing romantic ballads. He married his wife, Elsie van Dam, in Stepney Green Synagogue, and later moved to Holland and had a child. Their son was called Barney Greenman. Leon remembers Barney, playing with trains and being loved. However, whilst they were in Holland, the Nazis invaded. The Greenman family were taken from their home by German forces and then taken to Westbrook, and then later Auschwitz-Birkenau. Leon remembers the last time he saw his family. Both Elsie and Barney, aged only 2, were murdered in a concentration camp. Leon was in the concentration camp until the end of the war. It was during this time that he made a covenant to God. If his family survived, then he would dedicate his life to telling people what had happened during his time in the concentration camp. While his family had not survived, he still dedicated his life into telling what had happened to the whole world. He became an activist, a campaigner, and his story inspires us to keep learning and sharing these very important histories. As Holocaust youth champions, we are inspired by all these testimonies. We hope we can also inspire younger pupils to want to learn more as well. We'll be teaching a whole lesson to younger year groups as part of their Holocaust Memorial Day event. We hope that by seeing us teaching the lessons, younger pupils will they themselves want to take part in the following year. We know we have a great responsibility ahead when we do this, and we take pride in the real difference that we believe we are making. While it's giving us a chance to develop as leaders, it also means that we can take the chance to take an active part in working towards a safer future for ourselves and our communities as ordinary people.
Our school has also had the opportunity this year to work on a project with the Royal Wootton Bassett Academy of the Ascend Learning Trust. This project, led by Dr. Nicola Weatherhall, MBE, was inspired by My Family, the Holocaust and Me, a BBC documentary series. In the documentary, they followed families as they found their own histories and legacies of the Holocaust. One of the people to take part in the series is Bernie Graham. Bernie went to Germany to discover the lives and fates of both his grandparents, the Furbermans, and his uncle, Bernard. As part of the project we have undertaken, we've been able to meet with Bernie, discuss with him the journey that he went on, and the legacies of families like his. The project requires to learn about the Holocaust, Bernie's family, and then think about us and what these stories mean to us and how we see the world. Finally, we are asked to think about us, how the Holocaust and personal histories like this affect how we see ourselves in a world with genocide. As we know, there are many stories of ordinary people, remarkable people, who, just by trying to survive the Holocaust, inspire us today. One such person was Faye Strulman. Faye was a young Orthodox Jewish girl born in 1919. At just the same age as me, 16-year-old, Faye took over the running of her family's photography business. In May 1942, Faye's family no longer had a photography business. The Nazis had invaded the small Polish town of Lenin, and the able-bodied men of Lenin, as with thousands of other men across Nazi-occupied territories, were sent to concentration camps. And Faye, with what remained of her family, now lived in a ghetto established there. By August, the ghetto was removed. 1,850 Jewish people there were murdered, including Faye's family. By a cruel twist of fate, it was Faye's family business and passion that saved Faye's life. The Nazis needed someone to develop the film they'd used to document the massacre they had undertaken, and they chose Faye to do it. Faye did develop the film, but also made copies for herself. Then, this ordinary Jewish girl from a small shtetl in Poland managed to escape her captors and join a group of partisan fighters, who she joined as a nurse. Faye documented the lives of these resistant fighters, her own life, and the people she met over a 2-year period, taking thousands of pictures. She survived the Holocaust and eventually moved to Canada. I want people to know, Faye said. I want people to know there was a resistance. Jews did not go like sheep to a slaughter. I was a photographer. I have pictures. I have proof. Another story we learn is that of a young woman, her boyfriend, and a tin ring. The young woman's name was Zdenka Fantilova, who was an 18-year-old who was keen to study and learn English but was stopped by the Nazis. On January the 16th, 1942, she was deported to the Reisenstadt, where she discovered her boyfriend Arno, who had been deported earlier, was also imprisoned there. The couple lived in separate barracks, so it was both difficult and dangerous for them to meet each other. In June, Arno was told he was being taken to the east. In their final meeting, Arno gave Zdenka that tin ring, which became very important to her. In October 1944, she was deported again to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where on arrival she was told to undress and remove all jewelry. Zdenka decided to hide the ring by slipping it under her tongue. Fortunately, when her turn came for inspection, the SS guard hurried her along. Zdenka was eventually liberated in April 1945 at Bergen-Belsen. Although Arno did not survive, his ring did. Stories like this teach us the difference that ordinary people can make and inspire us to continue working as Holocaust youth champions to make sure that their legacies, like Arno's ring, survives.
Thank you, Esmail. Thank you, Jennifer. May the work of your hands be blessed. May you succeed in your endeavours to spread your inspiration to all of your contemporaries. We now have a reading of the Refugee Blues. I'd like to invite Jill Brennan and Rabbi Warren Elf from the Greater Manchester Faith and Belief panel.
As you can see, I'm here on my own. I'm Warren Elf, not Jill Brennan. You can probably work that one out. But Jill sends her apologies. This poem was written in 1939. Say this city has 10 million souls. Some are living in mansions, some are living in holes. Yet there's no place for us, my dear. Yet there's no place for us. Once we had a country and we thought it fair. Look in the atlas and you'll find it there. We cannot go there now, my dear. We cannot go there now. In the village churchyard there grows an old yew. Every spring it blossoms anew. Old passports can't do that, my dear. Old passports can't do that. The consul banged the table and said, if you've got no passport, you're officially dead. But we are still alive, my dear. We are still alive. Went to a committee, they offered me a chair, asked me politely to return next year. But where shall we go today, my dear? But where shall we go today? Came to a public meeting. The speaker got up and said, if we let them in, they will steal our daily bread. He was talking of you and me, my dear. He was talking of you and me. Thought I heard the thunder rumbling in the sky. It was Hitler over Europe saying they must die. Oh, we were in his mind, my dear. Oh, we were in his mind. Saw a poodle in a jacket fastened with a pin. Saw a door opened and a cat let in. But they weren't German Jews, my dear. But they weren't German Jews. Went down to the harbour and stood upon the quay. Saw the fish swimming as if they were free. Only 10 feet away, my dear. Only 10 feet away. Walked through a wood, saw the birds in the trees. They had no politicians and sang at their ease. They weren't the human race, my dear. They weren't the human race. Dreamed I saw a building with 1,000 floors, 1,000 windows and 1,000 doors. Not one of them was ours, my dear. Not one of them was ours. Stood on a great plain in the falling snow. 10,000 soldiers marched to and fro, looking for you and me, my dear, looking for you and me.
Thank you, Rabbi Elf. I'd like to invite representatives of the Greater Manchester Youth Combined Authority for the reading of The Happiest Man in the World.
"75 years ago, in the dark days after the war, I learned of a Nazi being held prisoner in Belgium for his war crimes, and I arranged to see him. I asked him, Why? Why would you do this? He couldn't answer. He started shaking and crying. He was less than a man, just a shadow of one. I almost felt sorry for him. He did not look evil. He looked pathetic, like he was already dead. And my questions remained unanswered. The older I get, the more I think, why? I cannot help but think about it as if it were an engineering problem I could solve. If I have a machine, I can examine it, diagnose a problem, find out what went wrong, and fix it. But the only answer I can find is hate. Hate is the beginning of a disease, like cancer. It may kill your enemy, but it will destroy you in the process too.
Life can be beautiful if you make it beautiful. It is up to you. Eddie Jaku always considered himself a German first, a Jew second. He was proud of his country. But all of that changed in November 1938 when he was beaten, arrested and taken to a concentration camp. Over the next 7 years, Eddie faced unimaginable horrors every day, first in Buchenwald, then Auschwitz, and then a Nazi death march. He lost his friends, his family, his country. Because he survived, Eddie made a vow to smile every day. He paid tribute to those who were lost by telling his story, sharing his wisdom and living his best possible life. Despite everything he had to endure, he believed that he was the happiest man on earth.
Thank you. I'd invite the Reverend Canon Nigel Ashworth to recite a prayer for Holocaust Memorial Day.
Thank you. Before I returned to Manchester, I was a vicar in Kent in a small community, and one of our residents was a man called Herbert Tint, who'd come to this country as a child sent by his parents. A Jewish man, he was adopted into an English family, but he never ever saw any other member of his natural family again. And so when we consider Holocaust Memorial Day, it does seem to be very important that it is so very personal as well as on such a vast scale. And I remember Herbert Tint. He was a remarkable person who went on to become a professor of economics at the London School of Economics. This is from the Chief Rabbi, Ephraim Mevis, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and Senior Imam, Kari Asim. Loving God, we come to you with heavy hearts, remembering the 6 million Jewish souls murdered during the Holocaust. The horrors of that history, when so many groups were targeted because of their identity, and in genocides which followed, we recognize destructive prejudices that drive people apart. Forgive us when we give space to fear, negativity, and hatred of others simply because they are different from us. In the light of God, we see everyone as equally precious, manifestations of the divine, and can know the courage to face the darkness. Through our prayers and actions, help us to stand together with those who are suffering, so that light may banish all darkness. Love will prevail over hate, and good will triumph over evil. Amen.
Tonight, Cantor Charles Chait, please recite the Kel Malei Rachamim, the Jewish prayer for those who are dead. On page 7 in your booklet, you have the translation. If I can ask you please to be upstanding for this part, if you are comfortable to, and if you are able to, please don't hesitate not to if it's more comfortable. If we could just thank Canon Ashworth for his reading of the prayer.
El Malei Rachamim Shoyechen Bameloyemi Hametzei Menucha Nechoena Ale Kanefei Hashechin B'malot Kadoshim Utahoyerim Kazoa Horaki Meirim Umazehirim Nishmot Sheished Miyonei Acheinu B'nei Yisrael Shenehegu Shenishchatu Shenishrafu Shenechenegu Shenidebeyu V'shenidberu Chayim Bidei Hanatzim Yozvehem Yemach Shemam Amaselu Chazana V'sham Ale Kiedosh Hashem Bavu Sheyonu mispalelim Lilumish nishmotzehem Lochen Baal HaRachamim Yasirein B'Seife Ganavav Li'olamim V'yitzua B'tzua Chayim Es Nishmotehem Lochen Baal HaRachamim Yasirein B'Seife Ganavav B'Seife Ganavav Mitzvah Et Nishmotehem Beganei Zehem Menuchazam Adonai Hu Nachalo Etam V'yanu Shalom Al Mishkava V'noyema
O God, who art full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant perfect rest in thy divine presence to all the souls of our holy and pure brethren whose blood was spilt by the murderers in Auschwitz, Belzec, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Majdanek, Sobibor, Treblinka, and other extermination camps in Europe, who were killed, strangled, burned, and buried alive for the sanctification of your name, for whose souls we now pray. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shadow of his wings for eternity. And may he bind their souls in the bond of life. The Lord is their heritage, and may they repose in peace in their resting places. Now let us say, Amen. Amen. Candles play a particularly important role in Jewish tradition. They are symbols of the soul. They are symbols of the good that souls do. We're now going to light candles in memory of all those victims of the Holocaust, all of those acts of goodness and light that never happened because their lives were cut so tragically short. And we light candles to remind ourselves of our responsibility to shed that light. I'd like to invite Mrs. Ruth Lax to please light the first candle. Invite Fran Horwich, Association of Jewish Refugees, to light the next candle. Mark Addlestone, Chair of the Jewish Representative Council, to light the next candle. In Morris of Unison, please to light the next candle. Sarah Cross of the Disabled People's Panel will light the next candle. Emily Wilkins of the LGBTQ plus panel will light the next candle. And Angie Marriott of the Women and Girls panel will light the final candle. Please join me now in a moment of silent contemplation of all that we have heard today. Thank you. Please now be seated. The Holocaust Memorial Day commitment will now be read by the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, by Elizabeth Cameron of the Race Equality Panel, Ilana Stone and Maya Shulko, King David High School, the Canon Nigel Ashworth, Dr. Saraswati Sindh, the representative of the Hindu community, Ayesha Ambreen of Fillinge Park High School, and Fran Horwich of the Association of Jewish Refugees.
Recognise that the Holocaust shook the foundations of modern civilization. Its unprecedented character and horror will always hold universal meaning.
We believe that the Holocaust must have a permanent place in our nation's collective memory. We honour the survivors, still with us, and reaffirm our shared goals of mutual understanding and justice.
We must make sure that future generations understand the causes of Holocaust and reflect upon its consequences. We vow to remember the victims of Nazi persecution and of all genocides.
We value the sacrifices of those who risked their lives to protect and rescue victims as a touchstone of the human capacity for good in the face of evil.
We recognise that humanity is still scared by the belief that race, religion, disability or sexuality makes some people's lives worth less than others.
Genocide, anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia and discrimination still continue. We have a shared responsibility to fight these evils.
Pledge to strengthen our efforts to promote education, research about the Holocaust and other genocides around the world.
We will do our utmost to make sure that the lessons of such events are fully learnt.
We will continue to encourage Holocaust remembrance by organising an activity to commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day. We condemn the evils of prejudice, discrimination, and racism. We value a free, respectful, and democratic society.
I'd like to invite His Majesty's Lord Lieutenant of Greater Manchester, Mrs. Diane Hawkins, close the service with a reading.
Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp, that turned my life into one long night, 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live as long as God himself. Never.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our ceremony today, and I'm sure everybody would want to thank Rabbi Walker again for facilitating today's event. Thank you to our musicians too. Wonderful to hear you. And all of you, everybody who's played a part and everybody who's here. I don't know about you, but I feel different now than when I walked in that door a couple of hours ago. I think it has been, as I said at the start, it's been a profound privilege, hasn't it, to spend this time together. And I think the theme that has come through everybody's contributions is that actually we're all ordinary people, but ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things, extraordinary courage, if they choose to do that. And Ruth, I just will speak for everybody in saying every single word you uttered was heard and held inside, and we are absolutely honoured that you were with us, with Werner, today. And I think the final show of respect and appreciation, I think, will come from the room. Thank you, everybody.
Just been asked to invite everyone to the room next door.